Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard. This week is Parshat Terumah. We are starting 5 straight parshas that have to do with building the Mishkan. This week is Parshat Terumah. Next week is Parshat Tetzaveh. And then it's Parshat Ki Tisa, where the first half of the parsha is all about the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And the second half is about the sin of the golden calf. And then we go back to Parshat Vayakel and Parshat Pekudei. So 5 parshas about the Mishkan, building the Mishkan. A good part of the book of Leviticus, of Vayikra, is about the service in the Mishkan. And even into the book of Bamidbar, into the book of Numbers, the first 2 parshas also are about the Mishkan. So obviously, we're starting a whole new theme in the Torah. And hopefully over the next few weeks, we'll be learning more and more about the Mishkan. So for this week, there are 3 articles in Fruits of the Orchard. There are actually 4. The first one we are not going to be able to get to, but the next 3 all have a common theme. And we're going to see how that plays itself out. And the word that ties everything together is the word chen, which means grace. It's usually translated as finding grace in God's eyes. But Rav Ginsburg teaches that this word chen, its other meaning or context is the word symmetry. That chen, in English again, grace, is connected to a holistic type of beauty, a symmetrical type of beauty. And that's the word chen. And it's actually one of the words for beauty is chen. So the 3 articles that we're going to be dealing with, one is called complementary opposites, because chen, symmetry, is when you have opposites, but they blend harmoniously together. The next article is called elegant symmetry. And the 3rd article is called a synergenic triangle. But as I said, there's a theme that runs through all of these, and this is the idea of chen. And this is very connected to the whole outer and inner meaning and purpose of the Mishkan. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, was the prototype of the temple in Jerusalem. And the temple in Jerusalem is the prototype of our synagogues today. That's a whole discussion in itself, the historical flow from the tabernacle to the temple to the synagogue, from the Mishkan to the Beit HaMikdash to the Beit Knesset. And the symbols, the physical symbols, are all the same. They run through all of them. The way a synagogue is set up today, it is called a mikdash ma'at, a small temple, a small holy place like the temple in Jerusalem. And so on the outside level, the Mishkan, the temple, was beautiful. In a sense, a synagogue, you can have a very, very plain synagogue, nothing wrong with that. But there is something about aesthetically a beautiful shul, a beautiful Aron Kodesh, a beautiful parochet, a curtain, a beautiful bima. So we're going to launch tonight into the whole world of the Mishkan. And one of the most important statements that we could say is that the Mishkan was considered a microcosm of the entire world. And a lot of the symbolism that is associated with the Mishkan has to do how each element, how each color, how each placement, the dimensions of each of the objects, how long, how wide, how tall, all of them have tremendous significance, tremendous significance. Hundreds of commentaries have been written about the idea of the Mishkan as a microcosm. So we're going to start with this idea of complementary opposites in relationship to the menorah, to the seven-branched candelabra in the Mishkan, later in the temple. And in the synagogue, it's replaced by what we call the everlasting light, the Ner Tamid. Almost every synagogue has what's called a Ner Tamid, a light that's always lit. And that represents the menorah that was in the temple, the menorah that was in the Mishkan. Here you see behind me an artistic view of the menorah. It's not meant to be shaped exactly like the menorah. There's actually a pretty famous disagreement with even what the menorah looked like, where many people make it that the branches were like rounded. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe went according to the Rambam, where the branches were in a straight line coming out of the middle pillar. So there's a disagreement of exactly what it looked like. The basic structure of it, everyone agrees that it had a central, call it a spine or column, and three branches on either side. So there's a midrash that Rashi brings that the construction of the menorah was one of the things that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand. And there's a whole question, what didn't he understand? The Torah is pretty clear about the description, again, except for this disagreement is exactly were the branches curved or were they straight? But other than that, the other elements, as we're going to see, everyone agrees to. And so the question is, what didn't Moshe Rabbeinu understand? And so that is what we're going to explore tonight, that it turns out that the meaning of the menorah is somewhat paradoxical and it has opposite possibilities of what the actual purpose of the menorah was. So we're going to delve into that. And so the first question is, whose light is the menorah supposed to represent? Is it God's light or is it Israel's light? Now we would say, well, it's both of them. Well, that's the usual solution to almost any disagreement, at least a philosophical disagreement, that there's truth on both sides. So I'm just, for those who have the book, I'm going to read a little bit from page 214. I'm going to read this midrash that says, Israel asks of God, you light the entire world and tell us to light the menorah? Let us see light in your light. In other words, Israel is saying to God, we understand the menorah as representing your light. The Holy One says, he responds and says, the little lights of your menorah are more precious to me than the lights of all the stars that I have placed in the sky. In other words, God is saying back to us, no, it's your light that is represented by the menorah. So the midrash, a different midrash, in a sense, solves this. And it says like this: the Holy One wanted the whole world to see how Israel lights for the one who lights the whole world. So here we see the first possible complementary opposites is the menorah represents us being a vessel for God's light. Therefore, the menorah represents God's light in this world. And yet, God is saying, I wanted to represent your light. Your lighting the menorah is more precious to me than any of the other physical lights that I have created. So here we see a beautiful complementary view of what the menorah stood for. It was both God's light and our light. And we see that very much in Hanukkah. When we light the Chanukiah, it's the same thing. Are we lighting the lights to represent God's light in the world? Or are we lighting the lights to represent our task and our mission of bringing light to the world? The answer is both simultaneously. And that brings us to the second possible opposites is, does the menorah represent light or a vessel? And again, it's both. In other words, it's God's light, but we're the one lighting it. It's not like a miracle happened. Actually, they say that one of the lights of the menorah stayed lit all of the time. That every day the Kohen Gadol would have to relight the menorah. It wasn't like Hanukkah that a miracle happened every day and the lights just stayed lit. There was actually an avoda to light the lights every day. So obviously that's sending us a message that every day we can't depend necessarily on the light from yesterday. We have to relight the menorah every single day. As we say, that God renews the work of creation every day. Ubetuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid maaseh bereshit. On the other hand, in the menorah, and also the Chanukiah, it is God's light. It is God's light, and we are the vessel. So here, the menorah is both the light and the vessel. And this is connected. We're going to see this more in the next article. But this is the same thing about the sphirot. There's much discussion. Are the sphirot lights or are they vessels for lights? And usually we say it's one or the other. Either something is a light or something is a vessel for the light. But here we're taught that in a sense, by being a vessel for light, we become light itself. This is a very, very important idea that by our being a vessel for God's light, we become a giver of light. So we become, from being a vessel, we become the ma'or, the giver of light. And this connects us to even another pair of possible opposites. Is the light of the menorah meant to represent infinite light or finite light? Which light symbolically is it? And again, we're going to answer it's both of them, because as we've been mentioning, it's the same thing with the Chanukiah, with Hanukkah. That, because first of all, it's very important to mention that the numerical value, the gematria of the word for light, or equals Ein Sof, equals the word that we use for infinity, the infinite one. Ein Sof is the same thing as light. Same gematria as light. And that's why even in physics and science, light it's a unique phenomenon. It has properties that really, physical light is finite, but it has certain properties that connect it very much with infinite, the idea of the infinite. For example, light has no weight to it. The photon has no mass, it's very paradoxical. It has no mass. So is it physical or is it spiritual? And so that's another pair of complementary ideas where the menorah represents both physical light. It's lit physically every day. It's a physical object, but it represents spiritual light. It's the same thing, the lights of Shabbat. Now, there's a great secret here, because the word Shabbat in gematria equals 702, which is the inverse number of 207. 702, 207. So that is one of the mystical reasons that we begin Shabbat by lighting candles. And especially when women do this hand motion, that's almost a universal custom. It's as if women are bringing infinite light into the finite light that they're about to kindle. But it's more than that. It's bringing infinite light of God into the Shabbat. And we know that Shabbat is different than the 6 days of the week. There's something infinite about it. That's why the Gemara says that Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. It's qualitatively different than the days of the week. So the light of the menorah is both physical and spiritual, is both infinite and finite, is both a light and a vessel, and is both God's light and our light. Now, there's two other complementary ideas, and the first idea is brought by Rafal Shimshon Hirsch in his absolutely brilliant analysis of the Mishkan. In the Hirsch Chumash, it's just absolutely brilliant the way he analyzes the Mishkan. And Rabbi Hirsch was not a Kabbalist. He was not a mystic, but his explanations are so deep and profound. So one of the things he says about the menorah is that it's made out of gold, pure gold. And yet, as we're going to learn in the next section, is all of the elements of the menorah represent a tree. It even looks like it has a middle trunk and three branches on either side. But as we're going to see, the there are flowers and there are buds and there are almond-like flower cups in the design of the menorah. And they're all of a growing tree. So Rabbi Hirsch says this is a tremendous message to us that on one hand, gold is considered among the three metals that are used in the Mishkan: gold, silver, and copper. Gold is the hardest. It's the most permanent. On the other hand, a tree represents constant growth and change. So Rabbi Hirsch says that the menorah is sending us a message that we have to be simultaneously both firm and strong and unyielding when it comes to certain basic principles in our life. But at the same time, we have to be supple and be able to change and adapt and grow and learn at the same time. And again, this is one of the paradoxes. We're going back to the first thing we said, that Rashi brings the midrash that Moshe couldn't understand how to make the menorah. Again, it wasn't because he didn't understand how to fashion it, but he was challenged with understanding what was the message that God wanted to impart with the menorah. Now, there's one more that we'll do, and that is the menorah was totally unique because it was made from one, we'll call it a bar of gold. There was nothing soldered on the menorah. They started, it's almost impossible to imagine, but they started with one block of pure gold. And then they sculpted out the form of the menorah. So on one hand, you have this idea of unity, that it's really the only article in the Mishkan, and it's even hard to imagine how the artisans were able to do this. But the idea was that it came from one block of gold, and that represents unity. At the same time, there are 7 branches, so it represents plurality. And this is in a sense, one of the most basic existential realities that we face all of the time, is that we live in a pluralistic world. We live in a plurality and duality, in a rush of stimuli that's bombarding us constantly. And yet our challenge is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, to always see the unity behind the plurality. So this is another complementary opposites in the menorah. So we've just gone through 5 or 6 different, and it's almost paradoxical views of the menorah, and yet we see that both sides are correct, and that they are unified in one form that we call the menorah. So now we're going to take the menorah and we're going to go a little bit deeper into the actual construction of the menorah. And that is that the many commentaries point out the number 7, of course, is so important to Jewish law, custom, tradition. There's so many 7s in our tradition. And in a sense, the 7 branches of the menorah represent all of them. In other words, there were only a few items in the Mishkan. It wasn't like there were so many. The fact that one of them has 7 branches is representative of all the 7s. The Baal HaTurim brings down that we learned in Parshat Yitro that when the Torah was given, God opened up all 7 heavens, and we were able to perceive all 7 heavens. There's a whole discussion in the tractate of Chagiga, around page 12 or 13 in Chagiga, about these 7 heavens, what their names were, what their functions were. Of course, this particular chapter of Chagiga is considered the most mystical chapter in the entire Talmud. And there is a whole discussion of these 7 heavens. But the Baal HaTurim also brings down a Talmud or a Midrash that the earth, the world, is called by 7 names. And so the Baal HaTurim points out that the menorah represents both the heaven and the earth that are described in, we'll call it almost a ladder of 7 names of the world. It's very connected to the 7 continents, the 7 seas, 7 oceans, and the 7 heavens. But in a broader sense, it represents all 7s, of which there are scores of different examples of where the number 7 appears in our tradition. So now we'll note a very, very interesting thing. For those people who were part of the 70 Faces series, I believe we actually went over this, but it's very, very fascinating that the human body, in a sense, is fashioned very much like a menorah. How do we see that? So if you look at a face, so there on each side of the face, there are 3, call it elements. We have, we'll call it the right eye, the right nostril, and the right ear. On the other, that's 3 branches. On the other side, we have the left eye, the left nostril, and the left ear. And in the middle, we have 1 mouth. So we have 7 elements. And I didn't mention, but the menorah, it is 7 branches, but it's very, very clear that there is a central shaft or trunk and 3 branches on either side. And so here we see the very, very important relationship between the numbers 6 and 7. And this runs through time, that God created the world in 6 days, and then there's the 7th day, the Shabbat. And we work the land in Israel for 6 years, and then there's the 7th sabbatical Shemitah year. And this cycle of history is predicted to last 6,000 years. And the 7,000th is the time of Mashiach, the Messianic era. So here we have in the menorah also a unity between time and space, because we know that space is like a cube, is 6 directional. We have the 4 cardinal directions and above and below. Of course, this is the whole secret of Sukkot, and especially of shaking the lulav to the 6 directions. So this is another complementary opposite that we didn't mention, is that you have 6 branches on the side of the menorah, and then the 7th branch in the middle. And everyone comments that this middle branch is Shabbat, and the 6 branches to the 2 sides are the 6 days of the week. So this is also, space also, like I mentioned, has 6 vortexes, but then you have the middle of the cube. That is the 7th, in a sense, dimension or space. So of course, this is way before Einstein revealed the unity of time and space, the time-space continuum. So the idea is already established in the menorah of the unity of 6 and 7 as applicable to time and space. Okay, so back to the human body. So in the face, we have, in a sense, a menorah. We have a middle shaft, but we have on either side, we have 3 branches. Now, take the arm. The arm is made up of three segments. From the shoulder to the elbow is 1. From the elbow to the wrist is 2. And from the wrist to the end of the hand is the 3rd. And of course, we have this on both sides. So we have 3 and 3. Look at the leg, it's the same thing. Oh, of course, in the arm, of course, the arms are coming out of the middle shaft of the trunk of a human body. The same thing with the legs. You have from the hip to the knee, from the knee to the ankle, and from the ankle to the end of the foot. So again, the legs are also connected to the middle trunk. So it's very fascinating that the menorah, in a very deep way, is in the image of a human being. But we also already mentioned that the menorah is shaped like a tree. But what's so interesting here is that we know that the Torah is compared to a tree. The Sfirot are called Eitz Chaim, are compared to a tree. And the human being is compared to a tree. In the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, it says that Adam hu eitz hasadeh, a person is like the tree of the field. So the shape of a human being is like the shape of a tree, and a tree is shaped like the Sfirot. I don't have a picture in front of me, but hopefully everyone can imagine. There are 3 columns to the Sfirot. On the right side, there are 3 Sfirot: Chachma, Chesed, and Netzach. On the left side, there are 3 Sfirot: Bina, Gevura, and Hod. And then you have the middle shaft. You have Keter, Dat, Tiferet, Yesod, and Malchut. So here again, this is really quite amazing that the menorah is representing the Sfirot, the tree of life, the Torah itself, and the human body. And all of them are connected to the idea of the tree, which is the actual shape of the menorah. Now, when we look at the elements, and everyone can just go to Google and ask for a picture of the menorah. But the menorah had 3 types of elements, artistically shaped in the branches and the middle shaft. Altogether, there were 22 almond-like flower cups. 22 almond cups. There were 11 buds or knobs, and there were 9 flowers. They were shaped like flowers. So all of these elements had flower-like or bud-like forms. And so when you add them together, there were 22 almond-like flower cups, there were 11 buds, and there were 9 flowers. If you add them up, it comes to 42. Now, 42 is a very, very important number. It is the number of journeys that Israel made in the desert. There's one tradition that God created the world through the name of 42 letters. And that name is engraved in a very, very mystical poem called Ana B'Koach, which has 42 words. And by tradition, the 42-letter name of God is the acronym of these different words. And Rav Ginsburg has revealed that the root for the word love, ahava, aleph, hey, bet, appears exactly 42 times in the Torah. And so he makes a beautiful comment that all 42 journeys in the desert were actually a manifestation of God's love and protection for us. In the book of Devarim, Moshe mentions that by nature, the desert of the Sinai is a very difficult place because of the heat, the lack of water, snakes and scorpions, and lack of food, so that we were able to survive for 40 years, millions of people, approximately 3 million people traveling together through the desert. Is like miracle after miracle. God's love accompanied our 42 journeys. So again, there's 42 appearances of the root word of love that corresponds to the 42 journeys, which now correspond to the 42 decorative elements of the menorah. But now, when you add the 7 branches, the actual structure of the menorah, then you get 49, which is a totally symmetrical number, 7 times 7. If you remember at the beginning of the class, we're saying the theme that runs through all of this is symmetry, is chen. And so the menorah, 42 is very, very important. But again, when you add the actual structure of the menorah, we have 49 elements. And it's discussed in Hasidut that just like in Gematria, when you have a word and sometimes you add just one more for the whole word, you add up the value of the letters, and then you add one more for the word. It's called ima kolel, with the whole word. So if you take all of the elements of the menorah, 49, and then you add one for the entire unified structure, you get 50. So 50, of course, is also a very, very significant number. 50 gates of understanding, Hamishim Sharei Bina, the Torah given on the 50th day, the Yovel year being the year, Jubilee year, the 50th year, all of these different connections with 49 and 50, the 49 days of counting the Omer, and then Shavuos, the giving of the Torah. 49 years of 7 times 7 sabbatical years, and then you have the 50th year, the Yovel year. So all of this is represented in the menorah. Now, one other thing is also a really amazing thing. is the numbers of 22, 11, and 9 that make up the 22 almond-like flower cups, the 11 buds or knobs, and the 9 flowers that are crafted in the menorah. Again, I'm suggesting that everyone just Google a picture of the menorah, and you'll see all of these elements in their fullness. So the 22 are quite obviously connected to the 22 Hebrew letters. The 9 is connected to the 9 vowels. And the 11 are connected to the 11 sfirot. Usually we talk about 10 sfirot, but as we've discussed many times, that when you they're really 11 sfirot. But when you count keter, you don't count dat. When you count dat, you don't count keter, to maintain the very, very important structure of 10. But really, there are 11. And this actually is applicable to string theory, where for a long time, it was posited that there were 10 dimensions. Not just the 4 that we know about, the 3 dimensions of space and the 4th of time, but there are actually 10 dimensions. And in order to solve certain problems in string theory, an additional dimension was, in a sense, conceived as a way that it would make a symmetry actually work that would bring all of the 4 forces of the universe together. And that's called M theory. They added an 11th dimension. So here, if you remember, something we've learned many times at the beginning of Sefer Yetzirah begins by saying with 32 wondrous pathways of wisdom. So here in the menorah, you have the 22 letters, you have the vowels of the letters, and you have the idea of really the 10 sfirot. But here it's actually the full 11, the full 11. So that is a very, very fascinating idea that is engraved in the menorah itself. Now we're going to go to the last article that's called a synergenic triangle. And here we're going to add 2 more elements or 2 more items in the Mishkan. We've been discussing really the menorah this whole time, but in the sanctuary, there was the ark, the Aron HaKodesh, that was kept behind a curtain, what was called the Holy of Holies, the Kadosh Kadoshim. On the southern wall of the Mishkan, or the temple, you had the menorah. On the northern side, you had the shulchan, the table that had the 12 loaves of bread, called the showbread. And then you also had a golden altar for the ketoret, for the incense. So what do I mean by a synergetic triangle? We're going to create here 2 triangles, and we're going to see that this is a secret of the Magen David, because the Magen David is, in a sense, very, very connected to the shape of the menorah, because it's made of 2 interlocked triangles. But when you interlock those triangles, then you actually get 6 smaller triangles. And then in the middle, you have the middle space that is the 7th. So the middle space is Shabbat, surrounding by the 6 smaller triangles formed by the 2 interlocked triangles. Anyone can just scribble quickly a Magen David, and you'll see the 6 triangles and the middle space. So this is just like a menorah. You have the 6 and the middle shaft. So the first triangle that we're going to form is the Aron, the menorah, and the shulchan. The ark, the menorah, and the table. And the first thing that we'll say about it is that it corresponds to the 3 higher sfirot. The ark is Keter, because everything is coming, because the ark housed the 10 commandments, the two luchot, the 2 tablets of the law, which of course represents the entire Torah. And according to tradition, the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote was also housed in the ark. So the ark, everything is coming from the ark. Everything is coming from the Aron Kodesh, that's Keter. The menorah is Chachma, because light is connected to wisdom, and the shulchan is connected to Bina, and this is because the showbread was sustenance. The idea of even though it's a stereotype, but it's the woman who makes the home, and the home is very much the serving of food. We know how much. Obviously, men can also cook and serve and clean up, but the idea is that the woman is called the bayit. The woman is called the home, and we know that the table of Shabbat, that's where, as much as we think that the essence of Shabbat is happening in the synagogue, it's much more happening in the home, around the table, around the meals of Shabbat. So here you have the triangle. The Aron is Keter, the menorah is Chachma, and the table is Bina. Now it's very interesting because the menorah is on the south side, and the table is on the north side. Now here you have a symmetry between physical and spiritual, because the menorah in general represents spiritual light, and the 12 loaves of bread represent the physical world, physicality, the material world. And here we see that, and sometimes we could think of those as opposites, but we know that the whole purpose is to unify physical and spiritual. So here we have in the Mishkan these profound symbols of both the spiritual and the physical. And the Talmud makes a very, very interesting point. It says, if you want to be wise, turn to the south. And if you want to be wealthy, turn to the north. And this is connected to the menorah in the south as wisdom, chachma. And if you want wealth, turn to the north. That's the showbread. That's the idea of sustenance and plenty. Now, another thing that connects these 3 together is something that we started to explore, and that's the idea of the tree of life. So we already discussed that the menorah is shaped like a tree, a middle branch, and a middle trunk, and 3 branches to either side. We already mentioned that the sfirot are called the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. But most importantly, the Torah itself is called the tree of life. And that was what was housed in the ark. So the ark is representing the tree of life. The menorah is the tree of life. Then the question is, well, how does the 12 loaves of bread represent life? And that is the common expression that wheat or bread is called the staff of life. It's a very, very common expression in many languages, that bread is the staff of life. And that's why in Jewish law, when a meal is obligated, like on Shabbat, we're obligated to make 3 meals. At a wedding, there's an obligation to make a meal. At a circumcision. And the definition of a meal is with bread. That's what you could eat all the food in the world. But according to Jewish law, if it's going to be called technically a meal, you have to eat bread. So here we have all 3 of this triangle. The Aron is the single point. From it comes the menorah and the table of the showbread. So you have a triangle. You have a triangle. And it's all coming, though, from the ark. And what's interesting is in the ark, you have 2 tablets. And we were told that the first tablet represents the mitzvah between God and mankind. And the second tablet represents the mitzvah between people, person to person. So here we also have a duality, but we know that there's not a duality between these 2 types of mitzvot. They go together. The way we relate to God is not divorced or independent of the way we treat or relate to other people. So here we have the menorah and the showbread coming from the unified ark, but in the ark you have the source of the two luchot that end up, in a sense, manifesting in the menorah and the showbread. Now, one other incredibly fascinating idea is that in Sefer Yetzirah, we learned that the 22 letters are divided into 3 groups. This is something we've gone over. I'll just do it very, very quickly. There's what are called the 3 mother letters, Aleph, Mem, and Shin. Aleph represents air, avir. The Mem stands for mayim, water. And the Shin stands for Eish, fire. The 3 elements that are mentioned in Sefer Yetzirah, from which all creation comes. So these are the 3 mother letters. Then we're told that there is another group called the 7 double letters. These are the letters that have 2 pronunciations, a hard and a soft, bet and vet, chaf and kaf, pe and fe. There's actually 7 of them. And many people don't distinguish between a hard and a soft resh or a dalet, but it exists. So there's 7 double letters, And then there are the other letters are called the 12 simple letters. All the 12 letters that are not either a mother letter or a double letter. So look at this amazing thing. So first of all, the 7 double letters are represented by the menorah. The menorah has 7 branches. The 12 simple letters are represented by the 12 loaves of bread that were kept on the table at all times. And the 3 mother letters is represented by a number of things. The ark was made of 3 boxes. There was an outside golden box, and then a separate wooden box, and then an inner golden box. There were 3 boxes: gold, wood, gold. And this goes back to what Rabbi Hirsch said, the idea that the menorah is made of both gold, but it's shaped like a tree, like wood. So you have the same idea in the ark. You have the steadfastness of gold, but in the middle, you have the growth-like attributes of a tree. So that's one of the 3s. Another is on top of the ark, there was a cover. One cover that had 2 kruvim, 2 angelic figures facing each other with their wings spread out. So here again, you have 3 elements. You have a unified cover, and out of that come 2 kruvim, 2 angelic figures. So here we see the 22 letters. Remember, we said that there were 22 almond-like flower cups decorated and engraved in the menorah. And that represented the 22 letters. But here we see in the ark, the menorah, and the table, we see also they're broken up according to the 3 divisions of the letters. So to me, that's just an amazing idea. And now to end, we're going to make a second triangle here. The second triangle is, I mentioned in the beginning of this section, that we have the menorah on the south, and we have the showbread on the north. But I mentioned, but we didn't include it in this triangle, we have the golden altar on which the incense was brought. So here we have a different triangle. Our first triangle was the ark was up here, and it branches out to the menorah and the shulchan. But now we have a different triangle. We have the menorah and shulchan going down to the golden altar. That's another triangle. Now, when you put these 2 triangles together, you get a Magen David. You get a Magen David, which is just also just a beautiful, beautiful idea. With this second triangle, so you have the menorah remains chachma, wisdom. The table remains bina and understanding. And the table now will become dat. And dat, of course, is below the ark. It's directly below the ark. And that's what we say when you count keter, you don't count dat. You count dat, you don't count keter, because they're mirror images of each other. They're mirror images. So here we have a second triangle. And as I said, when you put it together, you have a Magen David. So just to recap, to summarize, we began that everything we were learning tonight had to do with chen, grace and symmetry. And so all three articles that are in Fruits of the Orchard, that is the common theme of making a symmetry out of opposites, out of taking a unified form, but seeing the plurality in it, of seeing light and vessel, spiritual and physical, infinite and finite. And all of this is embedded in the symbolism of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. And this week we're beginning learning about the tabernacle. There's so much to learn, but there is a certain grace, a certain symmetry, a certain beauty that is the theme that's running through the Mishkan, which is a microcosm of all worlds. And that tabernacle or Mishkan became the prototype of the temple in Jerusalem. And the temple in Jerusalem becomes the prototype for our shuls today, our synagogues today. So I bless everyone with something I didn't mention. Really one of the most important verses, not only in this parsha, but really the entire Torah, is in this parsha where it says, God says, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make for me a holy place, and I will dwell in their midst. So the very, very famous, well-known statement is, it doesn't say, make for me a holy place and I will dwell in its midst, meaning in the physical space that you're going to make for me. But it says, v'shachanti b'tocham, so I could dwell in them. And so we learn that all of the symbolism of the Mishkan is actually representing the human body and the human soul. And that God's ultimate goal is not only that God had a passion to have a dwelling place in this world. That is what the Mishkan, the tabernacle, represents, is to make a dwelling place for God in this world. But the ultimate dwelling place is within our hearts, within our souls, and also within our bodies, is to make a vessel, a dwelling place, a Mishkan, that God will dwell in our midst. We should all be blessed to be able to contemplate that and ultimately to do that.